The thing that breaks my heart, the thing that really makes me sad is when species get taken out on the way. Because they're just on that road, they're just hit on that road and they're gone. And we lose that forever. And, there's no matter how many other planets in the universe might have life, yes or no, maybe, I can tell you that every species we lose on Earth is only here and it's gone. And no species except for humans has ever been that directly responsible for extinction. So when we as a species just wipe something out because we're just struggling with our own humanity and how to deal with it, super sad, heartbreaking. And there's lots of reason to be hopeful. I do believe that, truthfully, but it's that those losses on the way are really sad. And I often feel like us as conservationists, biologists, ecologists, everybody in this community, we are paramedics. We are ER doctors right now. I don't think we are going to be the one who fixes it and sees the patient leave. I don't want to be negative at all. I'm probably in our lifetimes, we won't be the doctor who sees the patient go out of the hospital as a planet, but we are the ones keeping them alive. And if nobody's there to keep that patient alive, he never gets to the second level of treatment where he or she can recover. If we don't do what we do now, more species disappear, more things disappear. So everything we do now won't be probably the long-term solution, but it's going to keep things alive and a lot healthier while we're trying to get there. That's how I view the work that I would do and all of us do. We're not at the end goal. We're not even close to it as a planet, as a species, as a culture. But if we don't do the work we're doing now, there'll be a lot less to save in the end goal.
Welcome back to another episode of the Protect the World podcast. Every month, I connect with a different not-for-profit organization that's making the world a better place. My goal is to learn about the issues they're tackling, interview the founder or director, and then share their stories with you. But I don't just want to share their stories. I want to contribute to their work as well. If you'd like to help me, you can sign up to the Patreon via the link in the show notes. The voice you heard at the beginning of this podcast belongs to Chris Ketola, Field Research Coordinator at Fauna Forever. Based in the Madre de Dios region of southeast Peru, Fauna Forever is a not-for-profit organization dedicated to understanding, monitoring, and protecting the tropical ecosystems of the Peruvian Amazon and promoting sustainable, regenerative livelihoods in the region. In this episode, I speak with Chris about the myriad threats facing this particular pocket of the Amazon, the importance of long-term monitoring in conservation, and the extreme nature of working in the environmental not-for-profit sector in the tropics. Apologies for the delay in this episode. I had a different organization lined up which fell through at the last minute, and then I had to wait for Chris and I's schedules to align. But this was an exciting interview because Chris lives and works not too far from me here in Peru. And so this is actually the first episode of Protect the World that I've been able to record in person. That said, it was a bit difficult to find an ideal space to conduct the conversation, and the room we ended up in was a bit echoey, so sorry about that as well. Anyway, I really enjoyed this conversation with Chris, and without giving too much away, I was particularly grateful for his openness about the ups and downs of working in conservation, and his willingness to speak about some of the more challenging periods in his life. Chris is someone who clearly thinks quite deeply about the issues he's passionate about, and I hope you get something out of the many little pieces of wisdom that he shares during this conversation. So now, I bring you Chris Ketola, Field Research Coordinator at Fauna Forever. All right, Chris Ketola, a very warm welcome to the Protect the World podcast, and thanks so much for joining me today.
No, thank you for having me, Brody. It's my pleasure.
I want to start by asking, who are you and how do you describe yourself?
Well, Chris Ketola. Yes, if you want to know what my role is, I'm the head field research coordinator for Fauna Forever here in Peru. Boy, describing yourself, that's hard. I think I'm one of the harder people to put a label on. I guess in terms of the work I do, I guess I would say I'm a terrestrial vertebrate ecologist is usually what I would say. I hate titles, but that's generally covers what I work with, which is basically everything that's not a fish that has a backbone, as I would say, is kind of my area of expertise. Yep. Some groups more than others, but that's what I do. I guess in terms of the person, just someone who's super passionate about nature and wildlife, and through a very long story of my personal life, I've realized that this is what I need to do to be functional as a human is be involved in nature and helping to learn about it and protect it. So that sums myself up, I guess, in a couple of minutes.
Love it. That was perfect. Very good. Cool. Before we get into what Fauna Forever does, I want to ask you to situate us in the place that you work. So for someone who's never been to like the lowland Amazonian jungles before, what is that experience like?
Yeah, I mean, I would say for a lot of people, it's everything that people would expect it to be when they think of the Amazon, with actually less animals. Because when you watch TV, when you watch an Attenborough documentary or a movie about the Amazon, people think of the vegetation and the plants and the sweat and the humidity and the harsh environment, and that's all true. And it's probably even worse or better or harder than a lot of people make it out to be. But what is also often there in a lot of TV shows and movies and documentaries is the quantity of animals, that there's a snake on every leaf, that there's monkeys everywhere, that there's, that you put your hand out and a macaw will just land on it magically or something. And obviously that's not quite what it's like. It's a lot harder to actually see many of the animals and to encounter them than people think. So I think those are I guess if I was going to talk about what it's like and some of the misconceptions, some of the image that people have from afar is very accurate, and some of it's maybe not quite what people would expect when they get on the ground and actually start doing work.
Interesting. Was that what you found when you were here the first time? Did you expect more?
I think I was prepared, as I had a background studying it before I came, at least generally prepared for it. I think what was surprising to me was from a herpetological point of view, in reptiles and amphibians, it was probably less encounters per day, per night, I guess I should say, than I expected. I will admit that. I think I did expect to find more snakes every night and more frogs every single night than we do. But in terms of the birds and the mammals, I think pretty much what I expected. I don't know that I was prepared for the level of human impact in the area that we work. But yeah, otherwise I think I was relatively prepared for what it was like. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about that human impact in a little while. But where exactly is Fauna Forever based? You guys have got a couple of different spots.
Yeah, so that's a good question. I guess there's the historical, there's the current, and then it's actually meetings today, there's the future. So we'll talk about the current. Most of our work for the last few years has been at a station called Secret Forest. And it's located, if I give you locations, it's not going to matter to many of your listeners. So I'll just describe it geographically. It's about, by a combination of truck and boat, it's about an hour and a half west of Puerto Maldonado. And of course, Puerto Maldonado is east of Cusco, the southeast corner of Peru, sort of borders Bolivia and Brazil to the east. For us to get to our camp, it's about an hour and 15 minutes by truck, and then another 15 minutes by boat. And currently we have access to, with those two with that site and the properties bordering it, where it's about 2,000 hectares of land that we work on. But historically, Fauna Forever has worked at approximately 50 different locations across Madre de Dios. It's actually one of the oldest research and conservation NGOs in all of Peru and all of Madre de Dios. And that includes iconic rivers like Manu and other places like Las Piedras River and Madre de Dios River. And some of the even more inaccessible rivers in the Bajo Asaneni National Reserve and everything, National Park. So that's historically, we were very much a mobile organization, doing a lot of baseline surveys for diversity and a lot of comparative research and monitoring. And then for a variety of reasons, which would bore your listeners probably, basically things have sort of become more stable recently. And the majority of that reason currently is because of our really important partnership with another NGO that's called Wilderness International. And Wilderness International is founded in Germany, but they actually own property for conservation in Western Canada, my country actually, and now here in Peru. And currently Wilderness manages and protects between 3,000 to 4,000 hectares of land in the Tambopata area at the moment, with plans to continue to ramp that up. It's a very growing organization in this region, which is really exciting. So because of our partnership with them, a lot of our work has been in these new properties just recently. But our plans in the future will be to continue to go back to our more mobile plans to visit many different sites throughout the region. Always have a foothold in Tambopata because it's a core part of our work, but we'll be more mobile in the future. So answering where we are is a long answer because we don't just have one single site. We kind of view the whole region of Madre de Dios, and now last year even Uganda as just another continent even as our sort of area of work.
Yeah, very keen to hear about Uganda as well shortly. How would you describe the organization's overall mission? What are you trying to achieve?
Yeah, that's again, it's a big spectrum. I mean, I would say that we have a few different primary goals. I mean, one of the big things that we're really good at doing and have a lot of experience doing is baseline diversity and long-term monitoring. And long-term monitoring, so a lot of people ask, like, what's your research? And when I think of research and monitoring, they're similar, but they're kind of, they're under the same umbrella, but that umbrella splits for different outcomes. Research is generally, you have a hypothesis, you have field work, you have analysis, you have an answer. And that can take you 3 months, 6 months, 10 months. It could be a PhD, 5 years, whatever. But it's very contained, and it's very easy to give you the output to that. It's very easy to say, this is what I did, look at my result, yay, and it's great and it's super impactful. Monitoring is harder to quantify, but it's in many ways, if you think about it, extremely important and can have especially in the climate we live in now, where we know climate change is such an issue and anthropogenic impact on the world is so important. If we don't have any baseline and we don't have any way to track that, how can we really say what's happening? Monitoring is often not given the same value, I feel, that research is, but I feel in many ways it has an equal, in some cases potentially greater value to research. A single project about one animal maybe isn't as important subjectively as a monitoring program that encompasses the entire community of animals, right? They both have value, but they're different but equally valuable in my opinion. So certainly Fauna Forever has a lot of experience with implementing these long-term monitoring projects and outcomes. And they can be looking at differences within a site, between seasons, between different sites, and it depends on how you want to utilize the data. It depends on what your outcome is. But historically, we've done a lot of work to look at, for example, the impact of the Tambopata National Reserve. So the National Reserve is actually younger than Fauna Forever, and our founder, Dr. Chris Kirkby, was actually involved in the planning of that reserve. So that's how long he's been around. Nearly 30 years now. And a lot of the work we've done historically has helped to better understand the value of the reserve. What is the diversity level in the populations of animals in versus outside? And it's easy to say the reserve is good. That's an obvious, but without actual data to look at, you can't prove it. And you don't know which groups benefit more than others. Some groups are going to be more impacted than others, right? So that's an example of monitoring how it can be used. So that's a big part of what we do. But I would say some of the other aspects of our organization are actually helping to host and design our own research projects. And as I said before, that's like a contained plan with an end. And we've hosted and been a big part of many, many projects, and especially thesis type projects for students and undergraduate, masters. And currently we're working with 3 different people in different levels of involvement with their PhDs. One of them is like intricately involved in our sites, for example, right now, all the data is from us, etc., for her PhD on birds. So, we definitely are involved in planning and hosting and even working with the output for those projects. And then another big part of us has always been, training young biologists and conservationists, ecologists in how to conduct field work properly, ethically, how to collect the data, how to do it ethically for themselves, of course, for nature as well. And that's been a big part of us, and I think it'll always be a part of our organization and how we're structured. And I mean, the final thing, I suppose, would be, community involvement and local infrastructure building is something that, as you can probably imagine, with an organization that's been around for over 25 years, it hasn't been a consistent every year. Some years are different. Some sites allow for more of it. Other sites allow for potentially less of it. Budgetary concerns come into it. But there's quite a few Peruvian researchers now who've gotten their start with us. One of them, Haziel Quispe, founded his own NGO, similar to ours in Puno. Another one, a good friend of mine, Herman Chavez, is one of the leading herpetologists in Peru, and he started out as a coordinator with us 20 years ago. So we've given a sort of a start to a lot of biologists and ecologists from Peru. And something we want to even continue to do more of moving forward in the future. So yeah, I guess that's kind of the scope of the organization. And again, not one simple answer as always.
That's brilliant. Yeah, it sounds like you've got fingers in a lot of different pies. Yeah,
that's a good way to put it. That's why I never have time to answer your messages. Sorry.
And I guess you can see that necessity in broader conservation as well. It's not just about one species or one focus area. It's about that collective ecosystem.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that I really enjoy about working with Fauna as well, is that we aren't an NGO that's focused on large mammals only or birds only. We really do. I would say the majority of our work is focused on 3 vertebrate groups is a lot of our work, which of course would be birds, large mammals, and herps like reptiles and amphibians. But we do a lot of work with botany as well, quantifying the composition of the forest in our protected areas. And then we also have, just since I've been with the organization, we've initiated a pretty intensive bat research program and monitoring program. And we have done work with invertebrates in the past as well. So I guess the only thing we haven't really done a lot of work with is fish, which would be interesting to get into. But we're pretty diverse. You know, we don't consider ourselves a one-dimensional organization in that way.
Very nice, cool. And how long have you been with Fauna Forever? And tell me a little bit about your role. How's your day-to-day look like?
Yeah, so I actually came down here first as a volunteer myself in 2017. Cool. And I was in a position in my life where I didn't really have a lot of funding, so I was not able to stay very long, a couple weeks. But I managed to make a good impression, I guess, in those 2 weeks. And I was got contacted by Dr. Chris Ketola 2 days after I got back to Toronto in Canada. And we had a meeting, and it was supposed to be 30 minutes. It was 2 hours, and your listeners already get an idea of how much I can talk. So yeah, it was a long meeting. And I just kind of springballed. We talked about projects and ideas, and then I was offered the chance to come back as a coordinator. And yeah, so I came back to full-time work here in 2018. So I've been here ever since. And yeah, my role has evolved and grown. It started out as actually herpetological coordinator, and then because I kind of love everything, I started helping birds a lot, and then I took over birds and herps at the same time. And then I've just evolved now into my role where I basically, my daily role would be overseeing everything with our camp, the daily coming and goings, and some mundane things like cars and food orders, other exciting things like research projects. I also am, involved in the designing of these projects, the goals for our research and monitoring, the outcomes as well. So I kind of have a hand in all of that. And then in terms of like my actual field work, like what do I do physically to get my hands dirty with, the animal sort of the fun stuff. My mornings are usually for birds. So that'll be waking up. Well, this time of the year, it's a little bit, the days are longer, which is just not as much fun for me because I have to get up earlier. So 4:30 alarm, 4:20, 4:30. And I'm in the field before, we have to be at our mist nets for birds at the crack of dawn. So if our nets are 2 kilometers away, it's a 30-minute walk to get there. So we're leaving at 5 a.m. often. And then, I'm in the field till like 10 or 11, probably 11, and then back kind of collapse in the afternoon unless I have other work to do. Try to somehow nap in the heat. And then the second day starts after dinner. So at 7, I would usually go out and start doing herpetological work. So that could be, looking for snakes and frogs in transects, or some nights it's going out in the river doing caiman surveys. And then at other periods of time where I would be shifting to bats, my evening would actually start at 4 o'clock where I start moving nets to get bats ready, and then I work until about 10 o'clock for that. So it depends.
So usually you're crepuscular.
Yeah. Basically, I just try to nap if I can in the afternoon, if the heat allows me. But otherwise, it's a good 10, 12 hours a day in the field usually.
Nice. Yeah. So. I mean, I think that heat of the day is definitely the best time to be trying to.
If you can, if it rains, as you know, it's awesome. That's like a little gift when it happens. For sure.
Could you talk a little bit, firstly, about the key threats that are facing tropical ecosystems generally, but then focusing on this particular region of Peru? What are the main issues and challenges here?
Well, I mean, it is very regional, right? I mean, if we're talking about, like, again, I got my first taste of on-the-ground experience in Africa earlier this year, and I haven't worked in Asia, tropical Asia yet, but we all know palm oil is a big concern there. I would just say deforestation in general is probably the biggest threat overall at the moment. It is hard to rank these things, but a deforestation or conversion of forest to agriculture is probably overall the biggest threat in tropical ecosystems. I think most people would agree with that. But it does become very regional, right? And even in Madre de Dios, it's actually super regional here, because if a lot of people who would have a sort of superficial 1 month experience in this region would probably say, oh, gold mining is the biggest problem, but even that is regional. So if I had to rank the problems in Madre de Dios, I would say it really depends on your region. It is either gold mining, it is conversion of land for agriculture, or it is actual logging for timber. And some of the areas have a mixture, for sure, but many of the areas are really focused on one versus the other. And I would say, from my experience, for example, where I work mostly right now, which is Tambopata, There is loss of habitat for agriculture. This is true. There is logging. This is true. But I would say one of the biggest threats we have, and certainly to the contamination of the water source and the reach of gold mining, it is gold mining. I would say in Tambopata is probably the biggest concern we have at the moment. And as some of your listeners probably know, this is not controlled, legal mine or sustainable mining, if there is such a thing. This is very much like artisanal mining using mercury flushed into the water. And then there's a lot of, depending on the mining you're talking about, it can be very small scale where the issue is mostly just contamination, but it can be much larger scale where they're actually cutting forest back from the edge of the river. And then in that case, they're also consuming a lot of bushmeat to survive as well. So depending on your region, even mining becomes regional. But the problem, of course, is that a lot of the mining that's occurring in areas near, for example, Mazuco, more west of Puerto Maldonado, a lot of that mining starts at the headwaters of the Melanolsky River, which then comes and meets Tambopata. So we're getting all that sediment, all that mercury, and all the contamination, and sediment as well, which is sort of additional sand and material in the water that would make the oxygen content lower, right? So it just really damages the river a lot. So I would say in Tambopata and on upriver from there, mining is probably the single biggest issue, especially because on the south side of Tambopata you have the reserve, which more or less protects it. That's never a simple answer, but basically protects it. But then if you move to Tahuamanu area, which is closer to the border of Bolivia and Brazil, it's just farmland. It's so much farmland, and it's very disheartening to be up there in some ways. Actually, that's one of the most interesting areas I've worked in, and I've loved my experiences up there. Like fantastic birds and mammals, oh my God! But to see, you drive through, and it's more like Brazil. There's just areas gone, wiped out, and it's actually and it's very different. It's dry. There's not a lot of rivers up there. So logging logging, yes, but more agriculture and cattle production as well is a bigger issue there. More like Brazil, in my opinion. And then Las Piedras River, it's more like from a satellite, it looks protected, but on the ground, there's a lot of high-value timber that's being logged and taken out of there. So it's not really mining, and it's not really agriculture in a large scale at the moment. It's more just going in, finding a shiawako tree, cutting it down and pumping it out and sending it off to whatever country it's going to go. And a lot of that is illegal, or it's like illegally filtered through a permit, essentially. Like a tree is, I've heard crazy stories about like GPS trees, which are not supposed to be taken, and then they switch the locations. And if you actually go check the GPS, you find out that the tree they took is in the middle of a swamp. It's impossible. So they just switch things to find a way to get it out. So there's a lot of illegal things happening there. So it's very regional. And I think it's actually a good example of how complex conservation is anywhere in the world. And if you have a complex ecosystem, it gets even more complex, the conservation issues and solutions. Yeah.
It's fascinating. Firstly, I mean, seeing like a big shiawako or something taken down is just, it's devastating. These hundreds, thousands of year old trees and but yeah, you're spot on. I find my interest is very much dependent on where I've been most recently. Like I came down here from the Upper Madre de Dios, from Bocamanu, down the river, and the amount of mining. I mean, I did that trip last year, a year and a bit ago, and the explosion of gold mining is just, I reckon it's doubled, if not tripled. It's unbelievable. But then you get further down to the Lower Madre de Dios, and I was amazed how little gold mining there was along those, thanks to the rivers. But then you've got the burning, there's haze and smoke and all of that kind of thing. You're spot on.
And of course, the thing that we don't talk about in all those issues is climate change, which is kind of the elephant in the room, no pun intended, because there's so much attention given to the Arctic and northern climates because it's so easy to see it. Arctic ice is gone and you can just see, wow, it's different. And then where I grew up in Canada, like I've seen in my time before I moved here, the changes where I live, it's like we've lost 2 months of winter. We've lost 2 months of snow cover where I grew up in Canada. It's insane, like 2 months of snow cover. That's like mind-boggling. So it's easy to see. I think in tropical areas, it can be harder to quantify because it's still hot. You know what I mean? Like it's like, oh, well, what's the difference? 35 to 37, it's like, it's still hot. But I think that what has scared me a few times is, especially in the rainy season. So in the dry season here, some of your listeners may already know, it's very seasonal where we are. We have a really dry season and we have a rainy season, right? So it's very seasonal. So not getting rain in July is pretty normal in my experience. But January should be raining, and if you go back and you read a lot of papers that have been published about this region, quantifying the rainfall in the rainy season, you see that there was 2 days in January without rain, and it's just raining, right? But I mean, my experience, I've had a couple years already, a couple rainy seasons where I remember in January, we had 5 days in a row, not a cloud in the sky in January. Not a cloud, let alone rain, not a cloud. And the temperatures were 37, 38. And we're talking at 9 a.m., it's 32 degrees in the forest under the shade. And it's insane. If you're sitting there trying to do birds and they're just dripping sweat, it's horrible. But that's a selfish perspective, but it is incredibly hot. But what really blows my mind is that, and this is where you understand the complexity of ecosystems and the systems in nature, and you understand how tiny changes just throw them all off, is that when it rains in the dry season, the water actually often sits on the ground longer than equal water in the rainy season. And that seems counterintuitive. You're well, it wouldn't make sense. It's raining more. Why would the water not be absorbed, faster in the dry season than the rainy season? The reason is that everything here has basically adapted and evolved to having a dry season. So many of the plants and trees are in a state of kind of waiting. Once they kick into overdrive to grow and absorb the water, they're expecting massive quantities of water, okay? So when there isn't that water, they're so thirsty in the rainy season. They're dying, and they're just where is this rain? It has to be here. Everything's set up. The same with frogs. I mean, frogs are laying their eggs in these vernal, temporary flooded pockets in the forest. I've seen these disappear in January. Every egg, every little tadpole is dead. If it dries up fully, they're dead. That's it. And that whole cycle where all those frogs tried to breed in December, and they put there knowing their larvae would develop by the time March, they could be little froglets, in April, just gone. That breeding event's gone because of a drying period. Now listen, these things in the last thousands of years have happened. Sure, we know that. We know extremes occur historically. And anybody who knows climate would know that. But what's scary, of course, is the frequency of these extremes happening. And you really do see how, we don't have sea ice to disappear here, but we have systems that depend on the climate. And when they get out of whack and change, they can be pretty shocking to see as well, especially when you do understand the systems, what's happening. But you realize that dry pool has killed all those tadpoles that were laid in December. They're dead in the middle of January because it didn't rain for nearly 2 weeks. And that's pretty striking for me. So that's another issue we're all facing all over the tropics that is sometimes harder to really quantify until you know the area well.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I guess at the macro level as well, one of the things that we're most concerned about with the Amazon is the breakdown of that moisture cycle.
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, as you probably know, there's some estimates, some models have looked at it potentially, in a worst case, as much as 80% of the Amazon could come back into savanna, essentially, in a worst case scenario. That's a nightmare scenario, but you realize that it is such a cycle that when it starts to break, things just don't work properly. And you see that, wow, this humidity is just not cycling. It's not being contained. And
I always want this podcast to be accessible to a general audience, so I just want to quickly explain what we're referring to here. One of the main concerns with climate change is related to what researchers call tipping points, or feedback loops. These are situations where once we get to a certain amount of warming, the negative impacts begin to snowball and spiral out of control. And there's lots of them. There's feedback loops relating to the way that sea ice reflects sunlight, or methane trapped in melting permafrost, or the carbon dioxide that gets released by wildfires. In the Amazon, the key concern is dryness. Normally, the rainforest acts as a kind of giant air conditioner, cycling moisture throughout the ecosystem, which lowers temperatures and generates massive amounts of rain. But as the planet gets hotter and drier, this moisture cycle begins to break down, and once it reaches its tipping point, huge swathes of the Amazon will begin to transform from rainforest into dry savanna. Alongside massive levels of extinction and biodiversity loss, the other concern is that this would convert the Amazon from a carbon sink, a net absorber of CO2, into a carbon source, a net emitter of CO2, which, needless to say, would be very, very bad. Okay, back to the podcast.
Everything in the Amazon is a lot more fragile than people would think, I think. That's one of the things I've learned being here, and I kind of knew before I came, but being on the ground and seeing it, the soil itself, the climatic cycle, a lot of things just depend on things being consistent. I mean, the reproductive strategies that species use, I guess I'll focus on birds in this case specifically, is entirely built around consistency in population. It's not built on extremes. The temperate zone, the average bird in the temperate zone is having 3 breeding, like the average passerine bird in Canada, the United States, Europe, is having 2 or 3 breeding events in a single spring and early summer. Nests, lay the eggs, they hatch, they fledge, start again. And if it's a good year, 3rd time, let's go, baby, 3rd time, And they might be pumping out like 14 baby chicks in a year. Most of them die. That's fine because of migration, the winter, that's the way it works. But they have a lot of young being produced because of the instability to adapt to that and survive it. Here, the same sized bird maybe produces 4 young in a year, probably only 2. Totally different strategy. And our bird banding, our ringing has shown us, and speaking to other people in tropics, that's a known fact, that the lifespans are much longer. It's meant to be stable. So when things become out of whack here, it's not designed, it's not evolved for that. And that also makes you realize how vulnerable tropical ecosystems, I think, overall are, but especially the Amazon, probably even more than Africa in many ways. We're very much built on stability. And when that's not here, it's kind of scary.
Interesting and sad.
Yeah, I mean, it's frightening, but but I guess motivating as well is the way to look at it, right? To protect what we have and try to make changes on a larger scale as well. So it is frightening, but also motivating. Yeah,
great. I guess on that note, could you walk me through the different programs that Fauna Forever runs? You've touched on them a little bit already, but I mean, I'm just going off your website here, but wildlife and research monitoring, I mean, you've covered that pretty well, but
I mean, so at the moment that is definitely, we've have as I sort of alluded to earlier, we've had a long history, and some programs were a big part of a certain period of time in our history, and some programs have kind of been not as important now. We are going to be redesigning our focus a little bit more in the future too. So I would say what we've been doing mostly recently, and what we'll continue to focus on, is that wildlife research and monitoring aspect. That's definitely the core of our work the last 4 or 5 years, and what's going to become even more of our focus moving as we sort of reshift our focus in the coming years, which we're actually really excited about, the changes coming. Basically, I mean, I guess that, as I said, it comes down to those major teams we work with. In terms of what those fieldwork activities would be, I'm happy to explain that. So birds are a mixture of mist netting, banding, ringing, depending on where the listeners are, and also point counts, so acoustic monitoring of the population, right? And we kind of split our mornings. I would say most of our mornings are probably banding, because we do get a lot of really interesting information from that, recaptures, breeding history, for many species, we can tell if they're actively reproducing or not based on the characteristics of their breast. We can learn a lot about the demographics of the population, the youngsters, the adults, how long they live. Also, molting, bird molting is a whole field of science, which I could do a whole hour about that. I love it. It's so fascinating. It's super geeky and niche, but once you get into it, it's super fascinating and it never boring. You can you can get a bird. There can be a bird I've caught the species 300 times, and I get one in my hand. I'm like, this is super cool. Look at the molt. So that's a big part of the birds. It's a lot of morning work, as you'd imagine, banding and point counts. The mammals are primarily transects.
Just quickly, a transect is basically a monitoring line that cuts through a specific area, and then you record the number of animals or species that you find along that line.
Well, actually 3 things. Transects, which allows us to understand diversity, but also estimate for some species the actual population density. So literally how many individuals do we predict or estimate are at a site, which is a pretty powerful number when you can get there. It takes a lot of work to get to that number, but we can do that with many species of animals, like goodies and peccaries and that kind of thing, monkeys as well. We also have, depending on the site and the situation, we do a lot of primate follows, which is trying to understand the group, the territory of the group, the quantity of individuals, also the food consumption, what species are they feeding on, what is their behavior. And that can be really interesting information because it varies seasonally. One thing that we know and other primatologists know is that the territory size, the foraging area of a group is bigger in the dry season than the rainy season because of resources, right? But it's also interesting to compare, for example, a selectively logged forest versus a primary forest and see how that varies in everything, but including something like the territory size and the usage of the habitat between the same species of primate can change. So these are some of the data we can get from that. And then, of course, as you would probably expect, we have a pretty extensive network of camera traps, which is really the only way to monitor large carnivores and jaguars and that kind of thing. if you see a jaguar in a transect, it's like you won the lottery. It's just, they're so smart and they're so quiet that for large carnivores, you really require camera traps to get any sense of the population. So
still waiting for my first jaguar.
Yeah. I actually saw my first jaguarundi last week, so I'm just missing Margay now. Yeah, nice. But if it makes you feel better, it took me 4 years to see a puma. 4 years. And well, no, actually 5 years for a puma. I saw my first puma 2 months ago, finally. And I saw my first jaguarundi last week. So hey, it takes a while. I saw my first jaguar in the very first week I was here. And then the first month I was working as a coordinator, I saw 2 jaguars at the same time in 2018. And I haven't seen a jaguar since. So there you go. It's hard. It's hard, yeah. The animals like that are the proverbial slot machine of nature. Yeah. You just, every time you go out, you pull it and you see what you get. Yeah. So for mammals, that's how we do that work. And then for herpetology, yeah, it's a very diverse group because of how diverse their life histories are. But the majority of our data would come from transects, and these transects are conducted at differing speeds depending on the group we're focusing on. If we're focusing more on frogs, it's a little slower, like an hour for 100 meters sometimes. If we're focusing more on snakes, then we're probably moving about an hour for a kilometer. We also do use pitfalls in some locations, some sites, which is very good for getting cryptic terrestrial and cryptozoic species. And then also, obviously, they're in that herpetofauna group, but they're quite separate in the way you survey them. Is the caiman research we do. We have a massive amount of data on the population of caimans in our region, Tambopata, and a lot of very interesting recapture data because we insert microchips into the individuals, and then we can tell the growth rates, lifespan. We have a massive database there. We're working on publishing some of that now, which is very interesting. So yeah, that's really, I love that part. I love caimans, I'm not gonna lie, it's super fun. Actually, my appointment I told you I have later tonight is to go get a tattoo of a caiman, actually. So I said caimans are one of my favorite groups for sure. And then in terms of bats, the bat work we do is a lot like birds. It's a mixture of mist netting and acoustic work. And then very similar, except at night. And then botany work is, a lot of plots to understand the composition of the trees. We measure the larger trees, the density of them, the size of them, and we can use that to better understand the composition of the forest we work in. In the future, we'll be incorporating probably more technology into that as well, LiDAR technology and that kind of thing. That's something coming. We have some data now, we'll be getting more, but the future is everything I've talked about, all those groups, technology just makes it better and more interesting. Yeah. So that's coming down the road across the tropics, but for our organization as well. So.
I've seen some of those 3D LiDAR models of rainforests. Yeah, that's incredible.
They're just really hard to work with. Like ones, trying to actually take that to put it into actionable data is the part that still is not easy. But the visualization of it and the potential is mind-numbing. Yeah. So I'm very excited for us to work with that data more in the future for sure. Probably we should have some output from that in the next year or so.
Cool. I would love to dive into every single one of those topics, but I want to try to keep this broad. So, moving on, I understand there's a range of different ways that you can get involved at Fauna Forever. So, as a volunteer, an intern, independent researcher, could you talk a little bit about the different ways that people can join the organization?
Yeah. So basically, I would say we have basically 4 kind of zones of working with us. One would be a volunteer, and I guess the line between a volunteer and internship, it's very much semantics. It's very much like just almost a artificial title we throw upon it, I guess, because you have to put a title on a website. But essentially, a volunteer for us is someone who is going to. It depends. If there's a very short term, 2 weeks, they're not likely to be able to contribute as much fieldwork experience because they're learning. So in that case, they'd have a lot of maybe writing data down, maybe helping to mark a trail, helping around camp a bit. And some volunteers are more specifically helping at camp, helping to clean it, maintain it, maybe helping cook, carry things. So those are volunteers, just basically there's less responsibility and we would not expect as much output from them for obvious reasons, either because of the skill they bring to the table or the length of time of their stay. But it's a good opportunity for people who want to help in a camp or want to just get a taste of what we do. That's what that kind of category is generally for. Internships are more a case of someone staying longer, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 3 months. And yes, they come in often with very little skill relevant to this exact area. So they might have skill experience in, somewhere in the United States or Germany or something. But neotropical experience, they usually don't have very much. But they're with us long enough that they gain that. And by the time they've reached the 4-week mark, the 8-week mark, they're able to often be able to do independent work with us or be a very valuable member of our team. So, for example, birds, it's very easy to explain the progression in birds. Someone comes in, they've never taken a bird out of a net. At a month, they're able to take it out of the net, but they're still learning how to identify the age of the bird with the feathers. And then by the end of the 2 months, they're taking it out and they're able to identify the age as well. They're pretty skilled by the end of the 2 months, right? So that's a very easy example of the progression. And everybody progresses at different levels, but yeah. And then I guess one of the other examples we have is this we call a skilled research or skilled research internship, and that category is very selected people who have a lot of previous experience they're bringing to the table. Maybe they worked in Brazil for 2 months and they want to come experience Peru, or maybe they worked in Costa Rica, or maybe they even worked in Africa, but it's very transferable skills. But these are researchers who are probably young in their career, still early, wanting to gain more experience, but bring something pretty significant. So our training for them, their learning curve is more just what species are here, not literally how do I do it, And I will be honest, a lot of people think they qualify for that, and when you actually talk to them, you're like, not really. Like, no offense to anyone who applies, it's not meant to be like that, but we mean someone who really brings something to the table. And we want that category because we want to encourage collaboration with those researchers, and we want to be able to be a part of, I guess, adding that finishing layer of experience to someone who maybe is like between their undergrad and their master's, that type of level of experience, And then, of course, we have people come who do complete their fieldwork for thesis projects, whatever level, and bachelor's, master's, PhD. And those projects take on everyone is different because, of course, it's customized, So what we do with them, what they do, how long they stay, that's very much variable. Yeah, so those are the general ways that people would join us. The majority of people come under the kind of internship banner, I guess you could say. But it's variable, for sure.
Interesting, yeah. I want to just jump back quickly. This has been playing around in my mind while we've been talking. You talked about the sort of shift towards that more focus towards monitoring as an organization. Why? So if you're looking at conserving and protecting this part of the Amazon, why that as a focus area?
Well, I guess the question is that versus research, right? And I would say that research, I guess from the point of view is you have to plan your year, and to undertake research, you need the people who want to do it, you need the questions and the program, and you need the funding. And funding is the biggest problem usually. So for us as an organization, we want to plan our year out. It's more feasible for us to plan out monitoring at the beginning of the year to the end of the year, and then sort of plug in research questions when they're available, when funding comes in, when a student approaches us, find a way to maximize that opportunity to have that project. Because the other option is you just wait until the funding comes along and you're not doing any work as an organization. So it's better to have this plan. So that's one answer, is that the feasibility of monitoring is easier to plan and execute. But I would also say, going back to what I was saying earlier, is that the value of monitoring is that it really does allow us to understand changes. And one of the things we want to work on more, we've done this historically, but we're always trying to improve. I'm going to be honest, we always want to be better at what we're doing, is really take our monitoring programs to sort of the next level and try to make it even more consistent in the way we do it and the look at the seasons and the years we do it. So it may not mean monitoring every single year, it might even be every other year, but we're working right now on developing plans to make even more consistency in our monitoring, so it's even easier to identify changes in animal populations based on climate or other anthropogenic impacts. And it's easy to say, well, why didn't you do it in the past? Probably as a listener, I'd ask that. Basically, the answer is logistics and budget. Most things come back to that. Logistically, getting permission to be on land, working with landowners, working with lodges or other NGOs and their properties. It's not always that easy. People come and go, ownership changes, things change. The landscape of this region has changed so much in 25 years. Like, my God, it's a completely different place. And budget is always a challenge. I'm not going to lie. It's the number one constraint for every single conservation program in the world, I would say.
Every single NGO in the world.
Yeah, is budget. And that's always a challenge. And it's a shifting landscape. We've suffered through massive financial issues over the last few years between, of course, the pandemic, which everyone struggled, and then we've had the protests earlier this year. It was a massive blow to us as well.
To clarify, Chris is referring to the nationwide political protests that occurred here at the start of the year and which dramatically reduced the number of people visiting Peru.
So we've had some really positive, financial investment with our partnership with Wilderness and other aspects. And there's lots of exciting opportunities in the future, but also we've had a lot of setbacks. So yeah, making these plans and executing, we could be, I think also because we want our scope to be bigger, it's exciting, but it also presents a lot of logistical challenges. We could simply only want to be at one little small site and focus on those same 2 kilometer by 2 kilometer trails forever, but we don't want to be that simple. We want to be bigger. We want to be larger. And that is exciting, and it presents amazing opportunities for our data and what we can do with it, and also research projects and comparative research projects, but it also logistically makes it challenging. So it's a big task to undertake, but it's an exciting challenge as well.
Yeah. What about at the macro level in this region? If we're talking about all of those complex network of challenges that you've got going on, where are the solutions there at that big level? Is it reducing demand? Is it policy? Is it buying conservation land? Like what?
It's probably everything is what I would say, but it's very difficult. I would say it's a mixture of all of that. It's such a complicated question, right? I would say that it really is all of it. So for starters, the most effective thing strategy to protect an area is, buy it and protect it. Yeah. There's no question. You can't argue with the results. Yeah. And what we're doing with Wilderness International, I'm not a sappy person. I'm not one of these people who gets emotional fakely, if I'm excited or emotional, it's very realistic. And there's a lot of days where I act pretty jaded in camp. I'm just like, scarlet macaw, who cares? For me, I see millions of them. So your listeners are like, what? I'm like, dude, it's a macaw. I see it every day. So I don't get emotional of things that are not really meaningful to me, is what I'm saying. So when I tell you this story, it's real. I remember, quick little caveat here, a little side story. Spider monkeys are essentially extinct in Tambopata, anywhere people are active. On the north side of the river, they're gone. They're just completely wiped out, hunted to extinction. On the south side, within the reserve, when you walk in 3 to 4 kilometers, you can start to encounter them if you're lucky. But anywhere people have ever been active with hunting or logging, they're just gone, because they're the most sought after monkey for food. So in our property on the south side of the Tambopata River, where Wilderness International owns a concession, and we now do research, about 2 years ago, I actually saw my first one in Tambopata, but it was really deep, and it was like early morning, and I just swung over, and I was like, oh my God, I was so excited. And then, over the next few months, as we were doing work in that area, we saw that in that same region, we saw them a bit more regularly. And they kind of I wouldn't say they're completely habituated to us, but they seemed to be a little tolerant of our place in the morning. So I was like, that's great, And then it was about a year ago now, it was November of last year. I remember I was walking we have a main trail that goes straight into the reserve, straight south. And I was walking, and I took a little side trail to check some bird nets, and it was 7 a.m. And I heard monkeys, the sound, you're used to it. And once you have enough experience in the field, you just can tell the sound of different species, the way they move. And the way it was moving, I was like, wait a minute, this is a lot of movement in the trees, but it's not a lot of individuals. So if it's a lot of movement with individuals, it's probably squirrel monkeys. But if it's just a lot of movement in a tree, but not a lot of individuals, you start to think, that's a big monkey. And there's not that many that are that big in Tambopata. And I thought, and howler monkeys don't move fast. They're lazy. So I thought, that sounds like, but where I was 300 meters from the river. And I'm like, no way, And I look out, and sure enough, there's a group of 4 spider monkeys, 300 meters from the river. And that's the first time they've been recorded that close to the river in probably 20 years. And that's in an area we have protected. Nobody's walking, nobody's hunting there. And to see that, I was really emotional. I got teary eyes. I was like, this is amazing. Our work has saved this area, and they're slowly starting to come back because of our work. So you can't deny those results. Those are real, those are tangible. But of course you can't buy everything. You can't buy the whole world, And we also want to be careful that we aren't only saving it in that way, because really it's effective and it's good and it's super valuable. And I would always support not just ours, but the work like ACA does and other organizations do, Jungle Keepers. It's very valuable work in this region. And without these organizations, these lands would not be protected. But also, let's be honest, most of these are foreign funded and founded organizations with the money, And we also don't want to live in a world where it's white gringo savior complex for the whole world. We have to build from the ground up as well, right? So it's a mixture of things. And how can we build from the ground up? And part of that is also reducing consumption from afar, because gold mining, gold, for example, of course, a lot of the gold consumption in the world is for commodities, which are, like investment for countries and that kind of thing. Excuse me. And that's harder to fix because it's hard to go to the United States or Europe and say, don't buy gold as a commodity. But a pretty significant amount of gold also does come from jewelry and other commodities that we just don't need. I mean, I don't want to judge anyone, but in my opinion, it's just my opinion, you simply don't need a gold ring. You simply don't need gold jewelry. You don't. I just can't understand how you can be okay with that. And diamonds as well, to be honest. And unless you know where the diamond's coming from, like Botswana is a unique example of how it's sustainable. But if you don't know it's very definitively, absolutely ethically sourced, you just shouldn't get into it. And yeah, gold is a totally unnecessary thing. And there's so many things I didn't realize how big of an issue was till I worked here, I'll be honest. And like coffee too. I could go on about coffee, shade grown versus normal growing. We don't as foreigners don't know this a lot. So yes, reducing the demand is a huge part of that. But in the end, if you reduce the demand, you still have people here who are trying to make a living, and how do they survive? So that's the hard part, is how do you create a sustainable way for people to live in a way that's, in some level of harmony with the forest. And there's no simple solution to that. I think, those get into, you get into some level of scientific policy, I guess you could say, where you could actually, this is definitely going to work. And some of it then comes into some opinions as well, which you'd have to say, well, what's your opinion? They should try this versus that. I mean, certainly trying to find more ways, sustainable ways to grow food is very good. Sustainable agricultural, agroforestry it can be very effective and powerful. But also we have to think about, like, my personal opinion, and I'm going to be careful because this is very controversial, is that a lot of this does stem from just the demand, which comes from the way our economy is set up, which comes from the fact that it's built on constant growth of money and growth of population. And we have to really rethink that. And these are big, big questions. These now transcend local. They become really global, right? So yeah, it's really tough. And I think it's also very easy for a lot of people to judge local people for doing things that seem bad and without understanding what their lives are like. It's very easy to sit there from afar and look at it, we've all seen these classic satellite images for 20 years, and you see the forest disappearing in the 20-year, sped up images, right? And it's easy to be like, those people cut those trees down, they're bad. I'm like, no, they're starving. Like, they need food. Like they didn't do it because they hate the forest. They did it because they need to live. Yeah. So on the ground, you can't. But even in that, there are people involved who do bad things, who subjectively are pretty evil people. But then they're often working with people who are just literally just surviving. Yeah. I mean, there's so many gold miners here who are tour guides at other times of the year. Yeah. It doesn't mean they're bad people. They're just surviving, because you make good money if you have no money for your family off being a gold miner sometimes. It doesn't mean they're evil people. And again, there's people in gold mining who are, I would argue, evil. Like, they're child prostitution supporting it and like executing people. And this has happened in Peru, okay? So there are some evil people and there are some really good people who are just have no choice. And it's super complex, and it's really important to not simplify it. I am a big proponent in everything in the world of not having things black and white. There's a lot of gray in the world. And this area is very gray. And that's why it's so hard. That's why there's no simple answer. So it is very much a cliche thing to say, but it's a case of, as a foreigners, we can just do everything we can to reduce our impact. And even coming ethically in ecotourism ethically is very, very valuable for supplementing income and providing support and an incentive financially to protect forest. Ecotourism lodges are very good for the environment because they protect massive areas because they know they make money off it. You can sit there and say, oh, they should do it because they love the forest, but in the end, they still need to feed their families. So if they're making money off of supporting it, I don't really care why they're doing it. If they're protecting the forest, I'm good with it. Yeah. So ethical ecotourism, some of the ecotourism is a little questionable in the world, we know that, but when it's done properly, it has a very positive effect as well. But yeah, it's a very complicated question.
No, I'm glad you brought up economic growth there as well, because I wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah, I've often felt like we could break down all the little micro issues, like the macro issues in the world. And we could go from really macro to like one area, like Puerto Maldonado, and we could continue to zoom out to like Peru, South America, the Americas, old world versus new world, and, you know, first world versus third world countries. But in the end, one of the things we need to, in my personal opinion, need to think about as a species is just reevaluating everything about how we view loss of diversity and extinction and the planet as a whole. And, you know, I'm not super old, but I'm not young, and I've been around a while now, and I've been fortunate enough to see the cultural change in how women's rights are, and the LGBTQ community's rights, and these things are getting attention. Thank God, finally. They're not perfect, we know that. I mean, I worked in a country in Uganda where it's terrible still for gay and lesbian rights, of course, but it's better. We can agree that these things are getting better, and it's getting better because a lot of our culture ethically and morally is offended by seeing women subjugated and people and, racial things being, people being racism. We just, and then abuse of homosexuals and lesbians and that group, we ethically and morally think it's wrong. So we try to do things in our lives and who we support to change that. And that's good, thank God. But we still lack that overall for nature. A lot of people, some people feel that way, but a lot of people still feel like, yeah, it's really sad, but we've got to do what we got to do. And, we cut a forest down, we make a species extinct. Oh, it's sad, but yeah, continue on, pass me the cereal, When we can really get the same impact from that we get from everything else, then I think changes will flow organically. We will all start to, how we view everything about our lives, our economy, how we run countries, how we make decisions, will change. And we're not there yet, and I don't know when we'll get there. I do hope, and I do think we will get there one day. I do. I really do. I know it's a lot of negativity, but I think we'll get there. Yeah. The thing that breaks my heart, the thing that really, 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 really makes me sad is when species get taken out on the way. Because they're just on that road, they're just hit on that road and they're gone. And we lose that forever. And, there's no matter how many other planets in the universe might have life, yes or no, maybe. I can tell you that every species we lose on Earth is only here. And it's gone. And no species except for humans has ever been that directly responsible for extinction. So when we as a species just wipe something out because we're just struggling with our own humanity and how to deal with it, super, super sad, heartbreaking. And there's lots of reason to be hopeful. I do believe that, truthfully. But it's that those losses on the way are really sad. And I often feel like us as conservationists, biologists, ecologists, everybody in this community, we are paramedics. We are ER doctors right now. I don't think we are going to be the one who fixes it and sees the patient leave. I don't want to be negative at all. I'm probably in our lifetime, we won't be the doctor who sees the patient go out of the hospital as a planet, but we are the ones keeping them alive. And if nobody's there to keep that patient alive, he never gets to the second level of treatment where he or she can recover. If we don't do what we do now, more species disappear, more things disappear. So everything we do now won't be probably the long-term solution, but it's going to keep things alive and a lot healthier while we're trying to get there. That's how I view the work that I would do and all of us do. We're not at the end goal. We're not even close to it as a planet, as a species, as a culture. But if we don't do the work we're doing now, there'll be a lot less to save in the end goal. So I think what we're doing now is super important, just like an ER doctor or a paramedic is.
This was a really great analogy from Chris, and it actually reminded me of a story that I thought I'd share with you. I remember chatting to a Zimbabwean environmentalist several years ago who was working in rhino conservation. And this was a guy who cared deeply about rhinos and who found the use of rhino horn in Chinese medicine to be abhorrent. And yet, he was fiercely advocating for the legalization of the sale of rhino horn. He told me how every year they would remove the horns of the rhinos in their protection in an attempt to deter poachers. But the problem is that rhino horns are made out of keratin, the same stuff our fingernails are made out of. And much like our fingernails, you can only trim rhino horns down to a point before it becomes painful for the animal. This conservationist was telling me that even that little bit of rhino horn that's left over can sell for over $100,000 on the black market. His team of rangers were drastically under-equipped to fight against these international poaching operations, and as rhino populations decreased, the value of their horns only went up, accelerating the rate of extinction. At the same time, his team had gigantic stockpiles of rhino horns sitting in a vault from years of tactical removals, and he was begging governments and conservation organisations to let him sell them in the hopes of flooding the market and bringing down prices. His argument was essentially that If we need to farm rhino horn for a decade or two in order to save them from extinction, then maybe that's what we should do. These arguments of idealism versus pragmatism pop up everywhere in conservation, and they're really tough. But undoubtedly, the people on the front lines, as Chris says, are emergency responders, willing to do whatever it takes to keep species from going extinct until we create a world that allows them to thrive. Anyway, speaking of Africa, let's get back to the podcast. Now, you don't just work in Peru anymore, but as of this year, you've begun a brand new project in Uganda. Tell me a little bit about that. I believe you got to go on the first expedition to set it all up.
Yeah, so no, it was really exciting. Super exciting. It's my first time doing field work in Africa, so that was great. And I didn't really know exactly what to expect about it. Some things were what I expected, other things maybe a little weren't. But yeah, I mean, just to explain where it came about basically because our founder, Chris Kirkby, he was actually born in the continent of Africa. It was, I believe, Tanzania, but don't quote me, I should know, but I believe it's Tanzania. Africa, Eastern Africa. He's always had a desire to do something there, but his life just took him to Peru for his PhD, and he married a Peruvian, started the organization, so he spent his life working here. His father is also a biologist in agriculture sciences, so helping develop strategies for feeding people actually across the world. He's worked in many continents. And his father retired in Uganda. So it seemed to be a natural fit that we have a connection there, a country that Chris Kirkby visited many times with his father and knew. And it just seemed like a good starting point to branch off and do some work in Africa. And also Uganda is it's biodiversity hotspot, but also lacking a lot of habitat now, like many countries in Africa, but also extremely under-researched, understudied. One of the least studied stable, I guess you could say, countries in Africa. Of course, we could talk about there's like Congo and everything, but historically pretty unstable. So you can understand why there's not research. Uganda, for the last 20 plus years, has been relatively stable, but still has proportionally less research than South Africa or many other African nations. Kenya as well has a lot more research historically. So very diverse, understudied, and we have a sort of an opportunity there. So it was kind of a natural progression. And yeah, we decided this last year, or earlier this year, I should say, to just kind of make the leap, and we viewed this first year as an expedition to get a sense of the country. So we wanted to really get a feel for the country, not just do one little area for 2 months. We wanted to spread out and just get a sense of everything. So we ended up visiting 8 different sites throughout the country. We've a couple spots in the north we missed, but basically northwest, southwest, east, southeast, around Lake Victoria, much of the country we covered. And the work we were doing at these sites, the sites we were working in were outside of national reserves, private conservation areas, or lodges. It was just a very logical first step to work in those areas. And we limited our work to 2 major groups because of the logistics, which is birds in the morning and bats actually at night. Very understudied group, bats there. And birds have a lot of baseline study, like what's here. But in terms of a lot about their actual ecology, molting, reproduction, timing, it very little. So it was a lot of really fertile ground for monitoring and research there. So yeah, it was extremely productive. I was just actually speaking to one of my colleagues on that trip, one of my co-coordinators, and she was with, two of my co-coordinators were both at an IUCN conference in Namibia just a week ago. And when I was up in Cochacashu, I got a text from them. And so there was a species we not discovered in this case, but we caught in our nets 6 times. And this species had been described only 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that in the world, at the moment, there are 12 records in the world, and 6 of them are from our expedition. So pretty incredible result. That's just a hint of what we got. We got a lot of new records for the region. Very, very, very exciting. So for us, it was a lot of baseline species list information we were getting, which it sounds simplistic, but in a country like Uganda, there's nothing. It's a start. You can't even plan a project around a species until you know it is even there. And in many cases, we're at that level, and also with molting and the life histories of birds there, very much understudied in many cases. So yeah, very, very good. And we don't consider Uganda to be year-round. We're going to be returning there probably yearly. We have tentative plans to go back again this coming temperate summer, which would be July, August time. We'd like to go every year and continue to have a mixture of revisiting sites we've been to, but also having expeditions and new sites to create lists and explore for new species and new occurrences of species which don't exist. And a lot of what we did in Uganda, similar to here, and it was also really partnering with local NGOs. And we worked with a group there called Sunbird Hill, which is just outside of Kibale National Park. Yeah, they were great. I mean, Sunbird Hill is founded by a English researcher named Julia Lloyd, and she's been there now like Chris Kirby, like 25 years. She grew up working with chimps, that was her background, but now she's moved on to this NGO, and it's entirely run by Ugandans, and it's all basically local people from the communities around that area. And we partnered with them, and we brought 4 of her actually, no, in this case it happened to all be men, but she does have some women working as well. Just logistically, it was all men this time. We brought with us to different sites, and then some of them had responsibilities, so at the halfway point they had to return to their work. But one of them, who showed a particular interest in birds and banding and understanding how to do it, he stayed with us the entire 8 weeks, and he'd never seen a lion, and he went on safaris with us, and he'd never seen a secretary bird, which is a famous bird, and it was his favorite bird. He'd never seen it in his own country, and he saw his first one with us, and he was amazing. Like he's such an inspiring. He just grows up in like a little village, and I mean like little village, like hundreds of people village, and now he's like working there, and he's like working with us, and so we're hoping to do even more of that kind of infrastructure building and expertise building, because it's very much lacking for a lot of groups. One thing, I guess the takeaways I would say from Uganda is that shockingly little research on groups that are not megafauna. Okay. Way less research on like herps also. Hard to study there because they're hard to find, but poorly studied. Bats are, I don't want to say not studied, but like less than you'd think, and birds as well, less than you'd imagine. I mean, megafauna, lions and elephants, that kind of thing, yeah, they're definitely more studied. But the smaller vertebrate groups are less studied for sure. I think that's the case of all of Africa, but I think Uganda definitely fits that. Which I was a little surprised at. I thought there would have been like massive amounts of knowledge, and when we get there and you're like, actually, don't know that much. I'm like, wow, okay. And then the other thing that I kind of was braced for, because everyone had told me, and of course we read about it, but seeing it with your own eyes is still a bit of a hit in the face, is how when you are outside of a protected area, it's just gone. There's nothing. It is just plantations of something or villages, or just gone. Like shockingly, like one thing working here in Peru so long is that we're fortunate still that a lot of the highways in the distance you'll see forest. Yeah. It may be 2 kilometers the horizon, but you see, way over there's the rainforest still. Yeah, in places in Uganda, and actually my experience this last year, I took a bus ride through Brazil, and it's the same. The horizon is just gone. Like Brazil was also like, where I was like, wow. I took it from Rio Branco to Inhapari, so about a 10-hour bus ride for westward toward the Peru border. One of the worst things I've ever seen in my life, because I know where we're driving should have been rainforest, literally like dense jungle, and it's just gone. And Uganda was the same in that way when you were away from national parks or protected areas. So that level of destruction, when you see it, it's not like parts are gone, it's just wiped out like a human bomb went off. It's hard to see.
I still remember my first experience in any jungle was in Borneo, and catching a flight from Kota Kinabalu towards the Danam Valley, and it was an hour-long flight, and for the entire hour it was just palm oil as far as you could see. And then you arrive at this little pristine pocket of incredible rainforest, and you're like, shit, it all used to be like this, didn't it? Yeah.
I know, it's, my friends sometimes, my friends know me, and most of my friends are biologists and ecologists and conservationists, so it's okay, but it's kind of joke sometimes that like I'm such a depressing person to travel with, because like driving along a farm, and it kind of looks pretty because there's green, and you're like, oh, look at the field of this, and I'm just like, yeah, but that should be there. Yeah, we take it for granted in North America and Europe even, how much of the land we see as green fields. Yeah, objectively or subjectively they're kind of pretty, it's green, but it's like, it's not, there's no diversity, it's just a farm field, It's can be pretty overwhelming sometimes to see, so that definitely hit me about being in Africa. But I would say the other thing that was really, really nice though is that the people there were super inspiring. The ones who were engaged in conservation, was a really, really genuine passion. Like a very much, I money isn't even the issue right now. I'm just doing it because I care. And that was like super inspiring to work with some of those people. Like I was fortunate enough to meet some people who were like, yeah, just really, really connected and really cared, and just it really didn't feel disingenuous. It didn't feel like pandering to the foreigner, which does happen. We both experienced it probably, where there's people who will tell you what you want to hear because they know that they'll get a bigger tip at the end of the tour or something, you know. And you can kind of sense it's like, well, do you really care as much as you say? I'm questionable. But the people we worked with, the connections we made in Uganda, they were, I mean, maybe they're really good liars, but I don't think so. They were really genuine people, and people that I was just like really inspired by. So that was one of the best things too, is just that people were fantastic. I loved it. Yeah.
I want to shift the focus towards you in a moment, but one last question, sort of generally, what advice would you give to a young person who wants to get involved in tropical conservation?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I would say basically there's no substitute for experience hands-on. You know, I guess a lot of it also depends on what your goal in your life is. You know, if your goal is really academia, then well, we know the routes for that: a master's, PhD, and getting a lot of time in a computer typing and all that. You know, that's what academia becomes, and largely. I don't want to say there's no field work, but if that's really what you want to do is focus in academia, then there's routes for that through universities. If you're more inclined to mix that with field work and you want to be more of a on-the-ground type researcher, and yeah, truthfully, there's no substitute for experience, because you can read all the books you want, but once you get down here, you really need to experience it. I would say, yeah, getting the opportunity to try to volunteer or come and work with some of the organizations. In some cases, in most cases, it might mean you have to, you know, work to get a scholarship, or you might have to pay some money to get a foot in the door, which, you know, does present hurdles to people from underprivileged households and communities, and that's a big problem, which is another podcast, which is very true. We can't deny this. Yeah, but it is unfortunately the world we live in. Money's short for everything. So if you're in the position where you're fortunate enough to be able to fund it yourself, or get a scholarship, or find the right opportunity where it's not very expensive, just really dive on that. And you know, for me, like, I've worked with so many young people, by now hundreds of young volunteers, and I just really, I don't know, it sounds very cliche, but I really appreciate people who are just in it for the right reason, really passionate about the place. They're not in it to try to brag. They're not in it to try to be, you know, famous on Instagram. They're in it because, and we all like Instagram. I use it. We all use it. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I'll say something about that in a minute. But I would say that you can tell people whose focus is that versus whose focus is truly passionate about nature and animals and conservation. And then the other part comes with it. And you can tell if you work with them for a little bit of time, you're like, yeah, I know why you're here, you know, versus, oh, I know why you're here, you know, yeah. But I would also say that social media is really dangerous and can be really negative for your mental health. That's a whole other topic. However, it can also be really useful for networking. So for anyone, tropical ecologist or any ecologist, biologist, conservationist, really understanding how to leverage and network through social media, Instagram, Facebook a little bit, Twitter to some extent, is really, really useful. And the image you portray, I would just say to a young conservationist, as someone who literally picks the people now to come, I look at Instagram, I look at your social media. It's very important to me. And if I'm seeing a whole bunch of stuff in there I don't like, a whole bunch of trashy stuff, a whole bunch of cowboy stuff, guys like, look at the snake and you're hanging by its tail, or that kind of stuff, I don't really want to work with you. If I see genuine passion and interest in someone who's really enjoying it because it's what they care about, I'm a lot more inclined to say, I'm interested in giving this person a chance. And because, listen, I can't know this person for 6 months before they come, but I'm going to work with them for months. So be really respectful and remember your output on social media and what it's saying about you and your values. I think in this day and age, it's a really important lesson to learn. Maybe when I was younger, even you were younger, maybe not as important, but now if you're 17 or 18 or 19 listening to this, yeah, your social media output matters. And I would also say trying to hide from it and saying, well, I'm just not going to do it at all, that's probably the wrong strategy as well. If you can try to create a presence that shows who you truly are, but in a respectful way, that's probably the best strategy. That would be my advice to people.
That's really good advice. I like that. Cool. All right, turning focus to you as an individual. Firstly, where did you grow up and were you always interested in nature?
Well, yeah, my life. This is a whole other podcast. I'll try to sum it up. Basically, yeah, I was born in Toronto, in the suburb of the city, but my family moved east of the city, about 2 hours east of the city, into the woods, literally the woods, when I was 7. There's more bears and deer than people. That's actually very true. I mean, so I was. yeah, it's a long story. It's not always a happy story, but I don't mind talking about it. I just don't want to take up too much time. Basically, I was fortunate, this is the good side, to grow up with a family that had an interest in animals and worked with, in captivity, I hate this term, exotic animals, but not farm animals, not dogs and cats, specifically reptiles, amphibians, raptors, and bats and primates. And our family founded a charity that worked with, it evolved a bit over time, but in I guess you could say the end, it focused primarily on raptors and bats, doing educational work, breeding projects, and also sanctuary to non-releasable animals that couldn't be let go because of their severity of their injuries. So yeah, I mean, I don't remember a life without that. You know, I was feeding baby Eurasian eagle owls when I was 6 years old. So my earliest memory is probably seeing a ferruginous hawk flying with my uncle when I was like 4. So that's been my whole life. I think that's one of the reasons why it's so comfortable for me to handle animals and work with them and catch a caiman or a snake or a bird. It's just I've done it my entire life. And yeah, I took over the management of that NGO when I was 20, actually, very young, and I managed it for 15 years until this is where the sad part of the story is, I guess, quickly, is that, you know, I'm very fortunate for the opportunity I had in that way. But my family was complicated, we'll at least say that. The relationships were not great. The environment growing up was not perfect at all, personally. And it kind of came to a head where the care of the animals for me was the priority, and it wasn't always that for the rest of my family. And we came to a head on that, and I was pushed out overnight because they were always going to come first, and I couldn't live with that, and they didn't agree in their way. And my life as I knew it at the age of 35 ended literally within a 72-hour period. So everything I knew was gone. I had to declare bankruptcy, had no car. Like, my life essentially ended.
At 35.
Yeah, it was really, really rough. And the
How
thing
old
is,
are you now? Do you mind asking?
no, I'm 42 now.
42.
Yeah. And everything about who I was that.
Yeah.
And it was gone overnight, instantaneous. Like, I mean, quite literally overnight. Like, one day I was feeding all the animals and caring for them. The next day I was locked out, gone. And yeah, it was hard. It was, I'm not gonna lie, I was super depressed. I thought about some pretty dark things for a while. I had some days where alcohol got me through it. It was tough. It was really dark. And what actually sort of saved me was that that was the first time in my life I'd not been around conservation, animals, nature, you know, in some way. And I didn't know who I was at that point. I was lost. And I got asked to come and help with an event called a BioBlitz, which is like a survey and educational all in one, like a crazy weekend of biologists come, and it's super fun. I love them. And actually, since this period, I've organized, before I moved here, I organized a whole bunch in Ontario. It was great. Anyway, so I got asked to come by the head of biodiversity of Canada's largest museum. And I told him, I was like, yeah, I'd love to come, but you know, I don't have the center anymore. I don't have the animals. I'm not working there. And in my mind, I was like, why are you asking me? I'm nobody now. That was just my mindset, you know? And he's like, oh, well, that's really sad. That's, you know, it sucks for you, you know. And he's like, yeah, well, we definitely want you to come. You know, we want you to do the bird surveys and do the bats at night. Da, 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 da. And I was like, I was like, I don't know. I felt weird, but I was like, okay, you know, I'll go. And you know, the minute I got there, I felt nervous. And then I met someone and I started chatting, and then they're like, oh, there's a bird over there, and I can't. Oh, you're gonna do the bat walk tonight. We're gonna do that. And, yeah, you and Burton will work in the bat walk. And I was just like the first time I'd actually had like a desire to actually be alive in 6 months. And I kind of walked away from that and be like, okay, like this is clearly what I need to have in my life. And I didn't know how I would get to where I was going to go. I had no real definite plans at that moment because it's so hard to restart your life at that age. But and if you told me I'd be doing what I'm doing now at that point, I would say, no, you're insane. but yeah, I mean, but that's kind of my story in a really nutshell, you know. And I guess it is kind of I have very high standards for myself in my life. And, you know, I think a lot of us in this world do. Many of my friends struggle with imposter syndrome, struggle with feeling like they've done enough or they're doing enough or they're going the right place. So many of my friends. And I think that it's reassuring in a way to hear that, even though you feel sympathy for them, it's also realize you're not alone in that, which I think is really important for all of us to understand that. We're not alone in those feelings. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong if you're feeling it. I mean, you shouldn't feel it, but it's also you're not alone in feeling it. And I think it's also, I'm really guilty of not taking the time to be proud of where I've come from, right? So I think I need to sometimes step back and really be proud of where I've come from and what I've achieved and where I'm hopefully going in the future. So yeah, hopefully other people, maybe a few people hearing that, we can realize if they're feeling insecure about what they've done or where they're going, like, you are not alone. Let me tell you, you are really not alone. Like, I've worked with people who are like postdoc researchers who are like famous, and they're like, yeah, I struggle all the time. I'm like, wow, the hell do you struggle? But it's just the reality of, I think our world, our mindset of caring so much and trying to just question things too, which is natural for being like a scientist, makes you question yourself. It's just the downside of having that mindset. So we just have to accept it and work with it and move forward with it.
It was really interesting you were saying earlier about the importance of getting experience, and then when you were invited to this BioBlitz, you didn't feel like...
No, exactly. No, exactly. It felt somehow it was irrelevant to me, right? And that's the thing. We all struggle with that. We all struggle with being nervous about what we've done. Are we good enough? Are we... It's so... I mean, there's some people who don't, and God love them, great. I'm so impressed by that. But there are so many people in this world that do struggle with that. And yeah, I just think it's a case of, you should, the tough part is letting it build upon itself. That doubt builds upon itself because you're like, oh, I'm doubting myself because I should doubt myself. And then nobody else doubts themselves, so that means I doubt myself more. It's like a vicious circle. I think we just have to try to acknowledge that we all kind of feel that way. And also, I said, speaking of social media, powerful tool, but remember, most of what you see is fake. It's always the best part. I don't post every day I'm feeling down. Are you kidding me? I learned that years ago. It's dangerous to do that. It's not worth it most of the time. And then there's a few people on social media who do it, and then great for them, and it works for them, and that's awesome.
Dangerous
and I appreciate
how?
them.
So,
sorry?
Dangerous how? What do you mean by that?
Well, it can be dangerous because you can be viewed as not someone that somebody wants to work with, because like, oh, well, they're too high drama, they're too high this, because you don't know the whole context. So if your post is about your feelings all the time, it's easy to be someone else to judge that as, oh, they're high drama, I don't want to work with them. Now, I'm not suggesting that I think, as I have a lot of patience, but there are going to be people out there who don't. I'm not suggesting that people should filter what they put out there. It's their social media, it's their life. But I would say that most people filter what they put out there. And that we shouldn't view, when you see 8 out of 10 people you follow that you respect, seeming to be happy every day, that does not mean 8 out of 10 people are happy every day. It means that they're filtering what they feel. So just remember that. And when you're judging yourself versus them, what you're seeing is not the full picture normally. That's very important. And I mean, I'll admit that too. Like, occasionally I'll open up to my feelings on social media, but I usually kind of, at this point, will put out the positive stuff and, talk to my friend group when I need support. That's just my choice. And I think a lot of people fall into that category. Yeah. Although I would also say, if anybody's ever listening and they want to advice or chat or talk or anything, like, I am very, very open about my feelings personally. I just don't bombard social media every day with stories about it. But on a one-to-one level, I'm super open and super willing to listen to anyone and offer any advice anybody might ever have. So,
Yeah, I guess on that, I mean, I think a lot of people would probably, at least ecologists and that kind of thing, would look at the work that you're doing and think that that's the perfect job, perfect life, dream, absolute dream. But I imagine the reality is obviously quite different. Could you talk a little bit about some of the challenges?
No, that's really, really good. I'm glad you brought that up, because it is true. A lot of people say that. And what I would say to that is, well, I'll say this first, then I'll give you some examples, is that a lot of people would say this is the dream, and I would say in many ways it is. But for many people, having kids is also a dream, but there's days that are super hard. And the thing that is hard for us sometimes is that it's we live in a culture now, which is good, where a lot of parents are allowed to say, man, it's hard being a mom, it's hard being a dad. And you're supported and you're accepted, because everybody's like, yeah, you're right, but it's okay, you're doing a good job. As conservationists, we often are like, well, you live in the Amazon, you should feel lucky every day. I wish I could be there. That's so unfair, because we're human beings. And it is hard, man, it is hard. Like, financially, basically for the last 5 years, I've essentially not gotten any pay at all. In some years it is quite literally $0. I've had to go back to Canada to do a contract just to make some money, to come back here and put 10 months into this place, Financially, it's super, super hard. Some people are fortunate to get a bit more pay, and great, and God love them for that, congratulations. But for many of us, it's super hard financially. That's one thing. Secondly, physically, it's very hard. The food we eat every day is not the healthiest, diverse diet. The climactic condition is very challenging on your body. It drains your energy. Disease risk. I mean, I've had leishmaniasis, and I've never been the same since I had that treatment. It burned my battery never reaches. I'm like an older phone now. 90% is max charge for me since I had it. It is a really tough thing to get. And of course, I'm talking about Peru. You talk to someone in Africa with malaria or other parts of the world. It's just injuries. Like, I've got scars, we've got injuries. It's not physically an easy job. It is very draining. People think, oh, you're fit because you're working on. Well, yeah, in some ways, but also you're just dying some days. Like you're so drained, like mentally you can't even think some days in the heat, right? We take it all on, but it's a reality a lot of people don't think of from afar. And then, finally, I think the hardest one for me, no doubt, is the personal side. Personally, I don't really have a family, as I mentioned. I don't talk to my family at all. I have no family I talk to regularly. I have a half brother occasionally, and I have his father. It's not my father I talk to, but that's it. The rest of my family is out of my life. But I have an incredible network of friends who are basically family to me. Like, they are amazing, and I'm so lucky to have them. I don't know where I'd be without them. And I've met most of them here, and that is amazing. But they're not here. Most of them are in Europe or somewhere else. And I'm really fortunate. I have for example, right now, two coworkers I work with every day, Nadine and Marcos, who are super people, and we're like a family, the three of us. And yeah, we're great together. I love them. But still, it's hard to have people you care about leave all the time, and they're not there. And also just like a personal side, it's extremely hard to have a partner who can live with this life. Yeah. It's super hard. And especially when you get older, like maybe I know some people who are in their early 20s, they meet an intern comes in and 20 things happen, that little fun stage of your life, it's great, whatever, cool, maybe that happens, that's awesome for you. When you get older and you try to commit to this type of work and this type of life, finding a person who actually wants to live this life or is willing to give you the space as a long distance and stay with you, knowing they're maybe only going to see you sometimes 2 months in the year, like Chris Kirkby's wife is a legend because she lets him come to the jungle and they're still, which it's not easy for her and them as well. I mean, that's all I'm going to say about because it's their life, but I know it's not easy. They're friends of mine, and I know for me, I've lost relationships over here, and I've had people that I thought might work, and then it's like, yeah, but you're too far away. That's it. And it's really hard. Eventually you don't want to be alone every day. Yeah, that's a really, really, really big challenge as well, the personal sacrifice. And I would not say that I'm really looking for, and I don't think any of us as conservationists are really looking for sympathy. We're not saying, oh, poor woe is me, because we choose this. I could go back to Canada if I wanted to find work right now. Yeah. But I think it's unfair to not allow us to acknowledge it. Yeah. And that's, I guess, all that I would say as it is. It's a dream, but it's also a tough dream. Yeah. And a lot of people who have high demanding abnormal jobs have a lot of sacrifice that goes along with it, and conservationists are absolutely no different than that. And the financial aspect is something that definitely needs to improve, but that's not a simple answer because there's a lot of people out there who are very critical of the way people are paid in conservation and the systems that fund conservation, which is a whole other topic. But what I would say is that that's very regional as well. Like we talked about conservation in general, funding for conservation is regional because there's definitely situations where it's very inequitable in North America and Europe because they just don't want to pay conservationists because they don't have to, which is unfair. However, when we get to the tropics, there just is not money. There isn't money. If I went to, my boss, or even I guess I'm one of the managers now, but if I looked in the mirror and said, you need to pay me this or I leave, I'd be like, well, leave. There's no other option. There's no money. It just does not there. So it's either we shut down or you don't get paid in many cases, or you get paid less than you should, And that's really hard for, I think, a lot of foreign people to understand as well. I've had many people come to me and say, well, you should just get paid more. I'm like, well, look at our budget. They're like, well, it's not fair. I'm like, I know it's not, but it's the reality of conservation. It's not my fault or our organization's fault. So it's a tough thing. And it's something where we just need more funding in general, but that's a symptom of our economy and what we value too, right? Yeah, so.
Yeah, wow, that's a lot. That period between 35 to now, could you walk me through that journey? After the bio blitz, you were invigorated. You're like, I need nature.
Yeah. So I was actually at the moment I was working in the paint and coating industry. So if you ever need advice on decorating your home or what coating to put on your deck, I'm your guy. I'm actually really good at it.
I don't have a podcast.
I discovered actually learning about colors has helped me with birds actually and nature because I really understand shades of color now. So side benefit. Anyways, so I did that, and that was supporting my day-to-day apartment and survival. I was still struggling at how do I, get back into it. So I started doing some more surveys and getting some contracts to do like bat surveys, especially in Canada, in Ontario. And then, I was basically got some contracts with Birds Canada, which is an NGO in Canada doing surveys of birds. But part-time, it wasn't full-time. It was just hard to get full-time work in Canada. And once you reach over the age of 30, a lot of the jobs are for people that get funded as youth. Yeah. So it's harder as an older person, if you're not already in a system advancing, to just break in a new direction. It's not that easy, you know. So I was kind of like bouncing around looking for options. I was developing some ideas in my head, but just kind of surviving. And then that's when the opportunity to come down here came about. I kind of knew that I wanted to work toward this. I had actually, I guess before this opportunity came about, my plan was to look into more working with consulting, but more ecological, like ethical consulting, as opposed to just like for business consulting. There is a very small niche out there for consulting, which is more for like NGOs and land trusts. Yeah. Especially with bats and some herpetological niches. And I still sometimes think about it because I really miss bats in Ontario, actually. I love those little guys. That was sort of something I was working toward, trying to develop a bit, some of my own. But, when this opportunity came, it just seemed too good to pass up. And also, to be honest, I was the same time that, the same week, literally, that I lost my work, my center I managed. My girlfriend at the time was moving out, and that was a very hard breakup for me, very hard. And
same week,
yeah. She left on Tuesday, and it all ended on Friday, so it was a tough week. Yeah, I knew she was moving, but it was still the moment of seeing her leave, and so she was. There's more to that story, but anyways, enough of that. So the point is, coming here too was also a chance to get a fresh start in that way, because living in the area where she was, and I was hard, you know, so it was difficult. So everything seemed right to be able to like get a fresh start, kind of break away. And that's not uncommon. A lot of people who come here, who choose to stay here, are looking for a fresh start, something big different than what they had, now that I'm away, I still personally like really miss Canada. I still love Canada, and I do really like the temperate zone, the environment, the climate, and I'm hopeful in the future with Wilderness International, perhaps I may be able to do some work in their properties in British Columbia, because I do really miss the temperate zone in some ways.
That was going to be my next question, your plans going forward. Do you see yourself at Fauna forever?
Yeah, I mean, I would say my plans moving forward, I don't know. I think that you have to be flexible in your life. Look, my life proved that to me. But I also think it's good to have some goals, of course. And I guess my goals would be able to work in more than just one location, which right now Fauna is helping with, the Uganda, and of course, here in Peru. Yep. I'd like to be able to move around to different sites, have an impact, have experiences in different areas. I would like the temperate zone to be a part of that in some way, but I know you can't have everything. So as long as I don't spend 12 months of the year in only one place, I'm okay with it. If Peru, and therefore association with Fauna Forever and Wilderness, is like my base for 6 months of the year, 7-8 months of the year, I'm okay with that. But I wouldn't want it to be 12 months a year for the rest of my life. And that's no reflection on Peru. It's just the world is amazing, and I want to experience more of it. And I can't say I traveled once to Guatemala as a tourist, although we were in nature a lot, but it was tourism, I'm not going to lie. But other than that, my travels are virtually always somewhat related to my work and conservation and doing something like that. And that's just how I want to be able to experience the world, is more that way. So being able to collaborate in projects, visit other research centers, help with that. That's what I want my life to sort of be. But you never know, life might change. Maybe I meet someone in 5 years and that pulls me in a different direction. But that's my goal at the moment. And I would like to have a connection to this region and Fauna Forever and the work we're doing indefinitely. Yep. I don't see any reason I wouldn't want to have some connection to it, whether it's full-time like it is now, or whether it becomes more of a part-time thing and involvement, consulting, planning, whatever. It would be very hard to not ever be here, not have any connection to this region after all these years. Yeah, it would be pretty hard. When you're away from it, it's when you're away for the first few days, it's like, oh, it's not hot and sweaty and the food's better. And then you're away for a while and you see someone else doing stuff and you see the photos and you're just like, oh man, I do kind of miss that. So, so I think I'll be involved in this region indefinitely to some extent for sure. Yeah.
I'm aware of time, but we're getting close. I want to ask you about your toughest, most challenging day or experience working for Fauna Forever, and then also your best, most rewarding day or experience. And I'll let you decide which one you want to talk about first.
Boy, that's a hard one. That's so hard to pick one one of either.
Yeah.
You know, I'm trying to think of hard things. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's like a singular day that I could pick out. I think that there's definitely been periods that have been really hard. I think that's easier to focus on. And to be honest with you, this year is probably one of the hardest years, if I'm being honest.
Why is that?
Last year was really tough as well, but this year's been hard. This year's been a year of extremes in a lot of ways, because the downside has been I've had 3 people in my life who have had cancer. One of them was actually, to be honest, Chris Kirby's father, who I was in Uganda with. Yeah. And we were staying at his home, and I got to know him, and you know, it was great, sharing his experiences and him getting to see our team and see it. And 5 weeks after I left, he was gone. And obviously, compared to Chris, is nothing. You know, I'm not his son. I only knew him for 3 months. But I mean, just getting to know someone and then seeing life just so quickly, yeah, it was like unbelievable. And that was a wake-up call. And then actually, before that, life is weird. The day that we started fieldwork in Uganda, so I had reconnected as a friend with the ex that I mentioned was leaving me. After 6 years of not talking to her, we reconnected and we talked through it, and we'll always love each other. You know, I mean, that was probably just the wrong time in our lives to meet, but it was a very powerful relationship for both of us. So we reconnected as friends just to be in each other's lives, and it was really nice. And we had been talking for about 8 months, and she found a lump in her breast in December, and she told me the day I started fieldwork in Uganda that it had spread and it was terminal. And she's still alive right now, but I don't think she'll make it to the end of the year.
Jesus.
And which is really hard, you know. And then another friend of mine recently also got diagnosed with breast cancer. And keep in mind, Kate, my ex, is 35, and the other friend is 31. Thankfully, the other friend I think is going to be treatable. But it's just been hard, you know. It's just is one of those years where you're just like, you keep grinding every day and you keep pushing yourself, and sometimes you see sacrificing, as they said, and you just like see these people around you care about, and just like, fuck, you know, life is short. Like, it's cliche, but it's true. And it's just put my life in a different perspective this year, you know. It's been hard. There's been some tough days for sure. But then I guess, you know, this year also has been super inspiring because the people I worked with in Uganda were amazing. You know, Cecilia and Fauna in particular, and all the team. But I mean, those 2 people in particular, they're just such good researchers. They're so intelligent, but they're just so passionate, and they're not doing it to be like arrogant or to show off. They're doing it because they're just so passionate, and they're just amazing to work with. I love them. Oh my God. And I remember Ivana she's so funny. She's Serbian, and Cecilia's Peruvian actually, and she's great, and Ivana's great as well. And Ivana's Serbian, so she's very tough, like, you know, like very Eastern European kind of it. And she never worked with a group that young. She'd always worked in universities, like older students and stuff, and like small groups. So working with a group of like 10 people who are all like 19, 20, 21, 22, she's like, they're not going to like me. They're going to hate me. They're going to think I'm, you know, really mean. And that's not what happened. Like, people loved her, you know. And by the end of it, I remember we had this conversation, and she was actually like really emotional, which for her is like, you know, kind of like, she's so tough, you know. And I said to her, it's like, you know, we loved you, Ivana, because everything you said was so logical, and just anyone would agree with you because it's so smart and logical. And she was just so awesome to work with. It was such an amazing experience working with them. And then, you know, this year I've gotten a chance to, every time I work with people from like, you know, my team and Fauna, and then people from Wilderness International who come and work with us, like, recently I did an expedition with Fabian Milberger and Lucas. I'm going to butcher his name. I'll just say Fabian and Lucas. They're great people. They're so awesome. They're so fun and so inspiring to work with. And then just recently at Coach Akashi, just getting to go up there and work with those researchers and see that environment. So it's been a year of extremes, you know, like really make you evaluate your life and what you want out of it, where you want to go, and what you want to be a part of.
And I guess how little control we have all of this.
Yeah, and how you guess you do have to you do need to just sort of take control and value yourself and move forward. And you know, I'm excited for the new year coming because I think we're going to make some really impressive plans and exciting changes. But yeah, so I mean, in terms of singular moments, there's so many amazing animal encounters. that are like, it's hard to rank one over the other, you know. I saw 2 jaguars in one day. I see the spider monkeys I mentioned, you know. Some of the birds I've captured. I mean, I remember one of the best birds I caught was like this little gray bird, which no one else who doesn't know birds would be excited about, you know. There's so many of those moments that I can't pick out just one. But I think it's some of the, as it is often, you know, let's be honest, like we're here because we love nature, but we're still humans, we're social. So oftentimes the experience with other people is what resonates. And the positive and the sad, you know, are the things that resonate with me the most. So yeah, I think working with people this year, they're really inspiring has been, and Uganda as well, I forgot that, but the whole experience in Uganda, not just the people, but the people in Uganda, super inspiring. But yeah, also personally this year, it's been bit of a tough. I would say the whole 12 months, starting from last August when I had a relationship, and all the way through until this August when I got more news. It's been a bit of a tough year. So, but it's okay. You know, I'm excited about the future and moving forward. So it's good.
That's an unbelievable year. I don't think I've heard anyone describe such a
it's been
tumultuous period.
That's true. But it's okay. Sometimes you need those tough years to see what you really want and what you need in life. You know. And that's how I'm trying to view it. And I think I've grown myself even this year. I think I'm always growing, you know, and I think we're all always growing, at least if we're open to growing. And I'm certainly a work in progress, God knows, but I like to think I'm better, as tough as the year has been, I like to think I'm in a better place than I was, you know, 12 months ago. So that's good.
I don't want you to miss out on your Cayman tattoo, but I have like a couple of like quick fire questions that I like to ask everyone. Does that sound good?
Yeah, go for it.
Cool. You're allowed to pick one person, living or dead, and you get to experience their entire life from start to finish. You live their entire life. So you pause your life right now, you live their whole life all the way through, good and bad, and then you come back to your life with all of their memories. Who do you choose?
Wow, that's such a hard question.
It's my favorite question to get that.
Yeah, it's so tough. I guess it's tough because I'm not usually someone who idolizes people much, you know what I mean? So that's why it's not like it's an easy automatic answer. I would probably say, I mean, I guess you probably had this answer many, many, many times, but I don't know if I can't think of one singular person who like was discovering things years and years ago. I mean, obviously something like Darwin, you could say, but also you have to put if I know what I know now in that climate, a social climate, it would be very hard to be there, you know, like I would be like, can I really have basically servants on this boat, you know what I mean? I don't know, that would be hard, right? So I guess the answer from a nature point of view would probably be something like Attenborough. Yeah,
that's my answer.
I mean, it's a pretty easy one. It's low hanging fruit.
Yeah.
But that would be it. I mean, I guess the other area that I'm really passionate about, strangely enough, is actually sports and that kind of thing. I love competition. I like competition in nature and in humans in a positive way, not in a negative way, but in a positive sportsmanship type way. So there's a lot of, you know, athletes that would be really interesting to experience their life, but with their skills and mindset. Like someone like Jordan, their mindset, their skills would be an interesting thing to experience. But
basketball, you mean?
Yeah. No, all sports. Jordan is one of those elite type of people, you know. But those elite level athletes or even Olympic athletes are very interesting to me, like Usain Bolt, whatever, because that level of competition, the pressure and the way you deal with it, the way you compete, the way you drive yourself, I find that very fascinating. It's a very interesting aspect of humanity, and when it's executed properly, very actually beautiful side of humanity. Obviously, sports can have a very negative side, like anything in humanity can, but the best parts of it are actually really beautiful in a lot of ways for me. So yeah, so that would be. But I mean, I think Attenborough is really easy one to choose because he's seen so much, you know, and he's seen conservation change as well a lot, which is an interesting aspect of his life. It's not just I've seen all these animals, but he's seen it from a very different perspective, starting at working with zoos all the way to now still working in the conservation field. And I also really appreciate him, and he's outspoken on his opinions at this age in his life. You know,
there's been a real shift in his documentary making. I find 10, 15 years ago it was just animals and like this is really exciting and cool, and now there's a real shift towards
I think probably part of that is, I don't know, I mean, I'm not a friend of his, but I assume part of that is a shift in his own mindset, and part of that is probably also a shift where he's just said, listen, my name is big enough, I want to do this, and otherwise I'm not doing it. This is the rule, period. If you want me in it, I'm doing this. And I appreciate that kind of like bluntness to anyone who knows. Clearly, like I'm 1/1 trillionth of Attenborough, but in terms of like me personally as a person, Yeah, I'm very blunt to the point. Like I just say what I think, and just you like it or don't. This is how I feel. Here we go. And I appreciate people who have the courage to just say their feelings on topics. And I think Attenborough at this point in his life is very much like, this is my opinion. This is what I think is the problem. I'm going to say it. And I appreciate that aspect of it, his life and his legacy for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Question 2: you wake up tomorrow and you find you've been elected president of the world, or Peru, or Madre de Dios, or wherever you want to be. Yeah. You've got full power, everyone's supportive, you don't have to compromise to win votes or anything like that. What's the first thing you do?
That's really good. Well, we'll go president of the world. Why not? There we go. Just go for the power, right? I mean, for me, I think the first thing I do is I've thought about this for quite a while, is I put an absolute wealth cap on everybody. So it's not just taxes, it's wealth cap. And what it is that it's like, you are not allowed to have a net worth of more than X. And that number can be big. I don't mind people being wealthy if they've earned it. I don't mind if it's at least $500 million even. That's okay with me. Because if you think about $500 million compared to 40 billion, think of the wealth redistribution. Come on. And the thing about that too is I feel like, okay, so I told you I like sports. And one of the things that's happened in sports, in North American professional sports over the last 20 years, is they've put in limits on salary and what in many sports, like basketball, as I mentioned.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so you can only make a max. It's like we have a term, max player. You know he's so good, he's a max player. We know what he's going to make.
I'm a big football fan, and we definitely don't have that.
No, you're right. You're right. So in National Hockey League, ice hockey as well, a max player. So I can tell you right now what this player will make next year, because he's a max player. His contract will be maxed out. Okay. So the interesting thing about that dynamic is that before this, players would chase the most money. Yeah. Many cases, which you can say they're greedy, but you can also say they have a family, they have a legacy. It's their only time in their life to make money. I don't see them as greedy as much as many people do. It's not black and white. Like everything, it's gray. But when you take away money as the goal only, you start to now see players valuing winning, their family's environment in a city, all these aspects, loyalty to the team, all those things become much more valuable because they know what they're going to make. It's done. There's no more chasing the most. It's just other things in life you value. So now if we live in a society where you can't try to be the richest person because there's a limit, there's a whole bunch of rich people. And the only thing you can do with your increased value is distribute it in your company or in your community. Yeah. Your mindset changes. We don't just try to be the richest human. You just get to a level and it's like, oh, I did what I can. Now, how do I reach fulfillment as a person? And those people who are driven to be multi-billionaires, they will need to find fulfillment in other ways that are not purely financial. And I do think that I won't fix the world, but it would change some of the drive behind many people and even the inspiration of people below them, and what we strive for is always being the most financially for so many people. And I do think taking that ability away could have a pretty fundamental change in our culture and our economy. That's the first thing I would consider doing right away, is putting that in.
That's a great answer.
And then after that, there's many micro changes you can make. But I think that's one of the very first things I would do, is try to start getting us away from a driven purely by growth financially economy. I have no issues with people earning what they deserve, but man, you don't need to be worth $40 billion. There's no value to that. There's no need for that. It's totally excessive and unnecessary.
I wholeheartedly agree. What happens when you hit the cap? Do you get a little certificate or something?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think what happens is that in this hypothetical scenario is you, of course, are earning money. So probably in a year you would make more than that, but you know that this is your maximum value. So then you're forced to either give it to the government wholeheartedly, or you're allowed to redistribute it within certain parameters. Like maybe you up the salary of your employees, or you donate everything above X amount goes off to charities or whatever. That's what we would have to be. Yeah, you get some kind of certificate. You're in that club, that probably not too exclusive club, because if you set it at $500 million or whatever, there's a lot of people fit that. But if you I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I'm fairly confident if you did that now with the world, the amount of money above that number that could be redistributed is astronomical. Yeah. It's easily hundreds of billions of dollars, which would change a lot of things in the world.
Well, it's something like 81 people have the same amount of wealth as the bottom 50% of humanity.
Yeah, it's insane. Yeah. It's absolutely insane. And those people continue to try to drive to be richer, which helps exacerbate and spiral more growth, which often even trickles down to places where we are here. Yeah. The demand for resources, the demand for growth trickles down to every corner of the world. It doesn't stay localized. Yeah.
2 more questions for you. Firstly, what are some other organizations that inspire you and whose work you admire?
I'm trying to think about it. It's again, I don't have quick instant answers for this, right? Yeah, I'm trying to think. I mean, the simple answers are, larger conservation NGOs, World Wildlife Fund, that kind of thing. And I guess it would be easy to say those, but I also feel like they already get a lot of that attention. They get a lot of funding. One of the things that I am inspired by is like smaller scale, I guess because I work for one, smaller scale NGOs that do really good work that I feel like, and conservation organizations that are doing really good work. And there's just so many of them out there. It's hard to pick on a singular individual one, I know like in this region, there's definitely other organizations. I know ACCA is doing a lot of good work. I know Jungle Keeper is doing a lot of good work. And where I just was, Coach Cashew of San Diego Zoo, funding a lot of their work, is doing a lot of really good work. That's in our area. We have worked with them a bit in the past, and we hope to continue to try to work even more in the future, hopefully. And then, there's also the really small scale ones, like I mentioned in Uganda, like Sunbird Hill, small little budget, but they're just working really hard, trying to make a difference locally in their community, trying to like literally have like local bird clubs for people to learn about birds every weekend. All the local community comes and learns all about the birds in the area, and trying to raise that level of awareness. And I saw the effects of that little local small scale, because we were at one of the sites doing bat work, and it's an area where they do stuff with birds every Sunday. And people came out to learn about bats, and all the questions were so good. And I'm like, this is clearly they've been learning about nature and science from this organization just by the questions they're asking us. So I don't think I have like a single big one that I would idolize. It's more, I respect the big ones because they make big changes happen, and there's a huge value in that. But I also really respect smaller ones that struggle but keep doing it because they're passionate about it, right? So I think that's probably a very generic answer, but it's the answer I would give to that.
Yeah, great. And a final question for you, Chris. If people were to donate money to Fauna Forever, what sort of things would that money go towards?
Yeah, so I guess Fauna and also Wilderness International can be funded as well. For Fauna, it would normally go to, just allowing us to purchase new equipment, a lot of infrastructure development. I guess it depends, obviously, on the quantity of the donation. But larger scale donations are often going to be used for infrastructure, equipment, that kind of thing. And then, which sounds not like somewhat boring, but also super valuable and important. And obviously with those large scale donations, then they can be directly funding projects. I mean, we could talk about all the potential ideas for research projects that we could have that are really impactful, but they're limited by funding. Telemetry-based projects, for example. That's a whole field for me. I'd love to do more, and will do more in the future, hopefully. But then with Wilderness as well, Wilderness I think it's easier to quantify exactly where that money goes in terms of like on the ground, because basically that money is pretty directly. There is obviously some infrastructure for the organization, but it's relatively, for the size of the organization and the quantity of donations that go through it, the amount of money that's put into salary and infrastructure is relatively small. It's a very efficient organization, a lot of volunteer-based time and everything, and not a huge amount of salaried people. So that most of the money that comes into Wilderness will go directly into like literally, well, the website explains it very directly, this is your square you've protected. Like quite literally, this now on a pin on the earth is where your money went to. So yeah, I mean, I would never pick between the two to make a donation to, because they both have huge value, and we work so closely with Wilderness that when Wilderness gets funding, it's great for us, and if we get funding, it helps them because we work on their land. So we're so closely connected that I often just, people suggest they go to Wilderness and do a donation there, but both organizations are always in need. For sure, yeah.
Great. Well, the idea with this podcast is that every month I feature a different not-for-profit organization that's tackling either biodiversity loss or inequality, and the interconnectedness between those two. But then I also run a Patreon where people can support the podcast and the project, and half the money helps me to keep telling stories, and then the other half goes directly to those organizations. So I'll be sending that money over to either Fauna Forever or Wilderness International. I'm going to get you a pick. I'll be doing that very soon. And a big thank you to everyone who supports this project, this podcast. And an even bigger thank you to you, Chris, for taking the time and also just being so open and honest about all of that today. It was a really powerful conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for taking
It's my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me. I had a lot of fun. It was great.
That was Chris Ketola, Field Research Coordinator at Fauna Forever. Chris was someone who I really felt sees the world the same way I do. He's got an immense appreciation for the beauty of nature and its many hidden wonders, and therefore has a deep frustration at the disregard and disrespect that much of humanity has for the natural world. But at the same time, he also realizes that most people are simply trying to exist and provide for their families, and that overcoming inequality is one of the most important steps we can take towards protecting the planet as a whole. As usual, I want to highlight 3 key points that Chris made, and the first is this one.
If I had to rank the problems in Madre de Dios, I would say it really depends on your region. It is either gold mining, it is conversion of land for agriculture, or it is actual logging for timber. Yeah. And some of the areas have a mixture, for sure, but many of the areas are really focused on one versus the other. And I would say, from my experience, for example, where I work mostly right now, which is Tambopata, there is loss of habitat for agriculture. This is true. There is logging. This is true. But I would say one of the biggest threats we have, and certainly to the contamination of the water source and the reach of gold mining, it is gold mining. I would say in Tambopata is probably the biggest concern we have at the moment. And as some of your listeners probably know, this is not controlled, legal mine or sustainable mining, if there is such a thing. This is very much like artisanal mining using mercury flushed into the water. And then there's a lot of, depending on the mining you're talking about, it can be very small scale where the issue is mostly just contamination, but it can be much larger scale where they're actually cutting forest back from the edge of the river. And then in that case, they're also consuming a lot of bushmeat to survive as well. So depending on your region, even mining becomes regional.
This one is close to my heart because he's talking about a region where I live and work at the moment as well. The reason I was able to catch up with Chris was that I happened to be doing some freelance work for another organisation nearby. And in order to get there, I had to travel for a day by boat from the headwaters of the Madre de Dios River down to the lowlands where Chris is based. I've done that trip a few times now, and every time I do, it gets more heartbreaking. For hours and hours on end, you float by hundreds of artisanal gold mines, each pouring huge amounts of mercury into the surrounding ecosystem, and turning the biodiverse banks of the Madre de Dios into barren wastelands. The number of mines has likely doubled, if not tripled, since I made the same trip last year, and there are no signs of it slowing down anytime soon. Similarly, there was a thick layer of haze the entire time I was in the area, as huge swathes of forests were being burned for agricultural purposes. Every evening, we'd watch these eerily beautiful sunsets as the smoke blocked out all but the crisp crimson disk of the sun. And it's really important to emphasize that this destruction is almost exclusively the result of increasing demand in wealthy countries. It's the gold in our jewelry, the timber in our floorboards, and the beef on our dinner plates. Which leads me to the next key point.
My personal opinion, and I'm going to be careful because this is very controversial, is that a lot of this does stem from just the demand, which comes from the way our economy is set up, which comes from the fact that it's built on constant growth of money and growth of population. And we have to really rethink that. And these are big, big questions. These now transcend local. They become really global.
It really frustrates me that Chris feels like he needs to be careful discussing this. It doesn't take an economist to realize that limitless growth on a planet with finite resources simply isn't possible, and that we are clearly going to need a new system of economics for this century and beyond. It's maddening that these ideas are still somewhat taboo, and that economic growth is still so often the objective, even when it conflicts with human well-being or the protection of nature. But there is reason for optimism, and we're starting to see this narrative shift. If anyone's looking for a more comprehensive breakdown of these ideas, I'd highly recommend Jason Hickel's book Less is More, or Kate Raworth's book Donut Economics, for an overview of what a 21st century economy is going to need to look like. You'll find links to them in the show notes alongside all of the organizations that Chris mentioned earlier. Finally, after speaking about the progress that's been made on a range of other social issues, Chris said this.
But we still lack that overall for nature. A lot of people, some people feel that way, but a lot of people still feel like, yeah, it's really sad, but we got to do what we got to do. And, we cut a forest down, we make a species extinct. Oh, it's sad, but yeah, continue on past me the cereal, When we can really get the same impact from that we get from everything else, then I think changes will flow organically. We will all start to, how we view everything about our lives, our economy, how we run countries, how we make decisions, will change.
This is a really important point. Far too often we see human well-being as something that can be achieved at the expense of our natural environment. Extraction of natural resources for new technologies, destruction of biodiverse ecosystems in favour of monocultural farming, or deforestation so that we can build bigger and more complex urban environments. And while these practices may provide some benefits in the short term, in the long term they will undoubtedly be deeply harmful. Ultimately, humanity is going to have to learn to live sustainably and regeneratively within the means of our planet. There really is no other option. But once again, there's reason for optimism. The rights of nature movement is gaining increasing popularity in mainstream politics across the world. So far, Ecuador and Bolivia have both afforded constitutional recognition to nature at the national level, and many countries have seen similar legislation introduced at the state and local levels. So I hope that we're starting to see the emergence of the kinds of changes that Chris is referring to here. If you'd like to support the important work that Fauna Forever is doing in southeast Peru, you can donate to them directly by visiting faunaforever.org/donate, and you can follow them on all the regular social media channels as well. On behalf of everyone who supports this project, I was able to make a donation of $100 to Fauna Forever, so a massive thank you to all those amazing humans. I also just want to emphasize that when I say that half the money that comes into the Patreon helps me to keep telling stories, I really do mean that. My plan towards the second half of next year is to travel to Africa for 12 months, creating short documentaries that highlight the work of more incredible NGOs. All the money that comes into the Patreon that isn't directly donated to our feature organization each month is going straight towards the pile of savings for that trip. I really want to get to a place where every month I can visit a different NGO, share their story with the world, and then give as much money to them as possible. So if you'd like to see that happen, please consider signing up to the Patreon via the link in the show notes for as little as $5 a month. Another big thank you to everyone who supports this podcast, and to Chris Ketola for being keen to chat with me about the incredible work of him and his team. I hope you found Fauna Forever as inspiring as I did, and I'll see you next time for another episode of Protect the World.